Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I hope everybody is well. Alhamdulillah, Allah Ta'ala has given us tawfiq to reconvene our lessons on Wednesdays to discuss some important topics. And inshallah, today, as you'll all be aware, we'll be starting the book, تعليم المتعلم طريق التعلم, the instructions of the student regarding the method of learning. Okay, so inshallah, this is a small book. It's about 40 pages or so, written by Imam Burhan al-Islam Zarnuji. And it's customary whenever we start any book that we always spend just a short while just talking about the author himself. Imam Burhan al-Islam or Burhanuddin Zarnuji, somebody who there's not too much written about him. I mean, if you look at some of the biographies, that they're quite brief, to be honest with you. And even in the book itself, there's not a biography about the author. But he was a scholar from the 7th century after the Hijrah, and he was a student of the author of Al-Hidayah, Imam Burhanuddin Marghilani. So in the Hanafi school of fiqh, one of the main textbooks is Al-Hidayah, and so Imam Zarnuji was a student of the author of that book. And he was known for his righteousness and piety, and even out of his works, I think this is probably the main book which is attributed to him. But it really goes to show that to greatness does not necessarily depend on how many books you write or how well known you are. Acceptance doesn't mean that you must write X number of books, or in other words, if you've written lots of books, then you're more likely to be accepted by Allah Azza wa Jal. Your ranks are likely to be higher if you've taught more students or you're more famous centuries later. There were a number of great awliya and ulama who hardly anybody knew. There were prophets who we don't even know, but that doesn't mean to say that they have low ranks. Prophets are the greatest, the greatest category of people that Allah created. Most of their names that we don't even know. If we say that there were approximately 124,000 prophets, approximately, out of them about 25 have been mentioned in the Quran. So you can do the maths on that most of them are not mentioned. Let's say there's 100 who we know of, or even 200. That's still a very, very small percentage. So what about the others? They're no lesser prophets. They are prophets of Allah Azza wa Jal. They're impeccable, perfect in their way. But Allah, for whatever reason, decided that they would not be well known throughout history and throughout the days until the Day of Judgment. But their rank is still amongst the elite. So Imam Zarnuji, I mean, he was from amongst the great scholars for sure. And Allah Azza wa Jal has decreed that his main contribution is a very concise but very, very relevant and important book regarding studying and the method of studying knowledge. It's quite beautiful in a way because when we study books, we often think of heavyweights who are, really, really well known, like Imam Ghazali, Imam Suyuti, Ghaus al-Azam, Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. I'm just looking at modern books and just thinking. And so some of the great authors have authored hundreds of books. But the contribution of scholars like Imam Zarnuji, when they have, written very small works, but they maintain their relevance throughout time, and they're still relevant in the 21st century. People are still studying this book, and around the world is in madrasas. It is a very important book to study, to be honest. And there's not too many books which are quite as concise and as well written as this one as well. So Allah has, blessed him in so many ways, and Allah elevate his status and darajat. The lesson for us to start with is we don't look at the quantity of what somebody does. We look at the quality that they produce. And that's lesson number one as students, that we don't look at quantity, we look at quality. So, it links nicely to actually the subject of the book about the etiquettes of learning, the etiquettes of studying the noble deen, is that we don't look for fame and glory. We look at quality of the work that's being done. And so, what I'm trying to say is that the author fits in nicely, and the fact that Allah chose a teacher who perhaps is not that well known to author such an important work also links into that. We can derive lessons from that itself, that Allah chose this teacher who hasn't authored many works, he's not very famous, to author a book about how to study the deen. So within that is a lesson for us as well. So, Allah Ta'ala gives tawfiq, inshallah, to commence and to complete the study of the book in and benefit from that. So inshallah, Laziz, we will make a start. Allahumma yassir wa la tu'assir wa tammim bil khair wa bika nasta'in. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ربي زدني علما ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Okay, so the book itself, from what I could tell, is not available for purchase anywhere. We did have a copy of it a long time ago, but it's out of print. And so when something goes out of print in English anyway, then it kind of falls to the back of people's memories and they don't remember the book, do they? It's not very that popular necessarily. It is still available in Arabic. So those students who can read Arabic should get a copy for sure. And I've also put a link for the PDF in the group as well. I printed a copy for myself, and I think it's always good to have a printed version to read through. So, as you can imagine, by the name of the book itself, تعليم المتعلم طريق التعلم, teaching the student the method of learning. It's all about how people should approach sacred knowledge or knowledge in general, how we should study the methodology that we should adopt, and so on. It's really interesting, just the fact that it's written about this is interesting in and of itself, because what tends to happen now, especially in today's day and age, is that people just launch into the work that they want to do. They just kind of, without thinking, without understanding, they just go for it. And studying knowledge is the same, unfortunately. People in their enthusiasm, they just wake up one day and say, I'm going to study today. And then they just, if they are, if Allah Ta'ala gives them tawfiq to start studying. But what we have to remember is that studying the deen is a journey that a person goes on. It's a very important and it's a very personal journey that somebody embarks on with the tawfiq of Allah Azza wa Jal. And just like with any journey, we have to be prepared for that journey. We have to think about that journey. We have to plan it. We have to have the right qualities to embark on that journey to truly succeed. I mean, it doesn't mean to say that somebody should hold back until they've studied these kind of books. They should hasten and should be quick and should rush towards understanding the deen, no doubt. But at the same time, learning how to study is just as important as studying itself. Because just as Imam Zarnuji, he says in the beginning, in his introduction, he basically, highlights the fact that many people, they are unable to study, or they fail in their quest for understanding of the deen, because they don't really know how to study it properly. They had false expectations. For example, it might be that they didn't have the right inner qualities, or they practically didn't appreciate, how to structure their time according to their studies and all of those things. So they weren't able to perhaps prioritize it. And again, this is something we see day in, day out. I mean, I often mention this to people who I speak to, is that when we were studying, there were a number of people who start, and then slowly but surely the number decreases, doesn't it? That's the same in every class, right? It's just the way things are. When you start something, there's always a number of students. As things go forward, then the number decreases for whatever reason. And when we were studying, let's say we'd see someone who used to study, and then they'd stop studying. And so I'd say to them, so how, just didn't you say Salam Dua, you meet them, and so you just curious, how are you, how's things? And then what transpired is, oh, I'm married now, or I have children now, or I have got a new job, or whatever it may be. And so I can't come to lesson anymore. And so a lot of the time is legitimate reasons. I'm not belittling people's circumstances, but for in many respects, become victim of our circumstances. That's what we always, whether we acknowledge it or not, we're victims of our circumstances. And our circumstances are essentially holding us hostage in our journey to Allah, or from our journey to Allah. And so even managing someone's circumstances so that they are enabled to actually become close to Allah Azza wa Jal through studying the Noble Deen, that's another part of, you know, this kind of topic, the subject, learning how to study, right? Managing your time so you can study. So it's a very, very important book, to be honest with you. And it covers lots of different things in terms of uh, mental capacity, physical, spiritual training, and how all of the different aspects of a person, um, how all the different aspects of a person are, or certain qualities that are needed in all different aspects for them to become closer and be successful in their studies. So start with the author's introduction. This is on page 1. So Imam Zarnuji, he starts, in the name of Allah, the merciful, the mercy-giving. All praise is for Allah, who favored the children of Adam with knowledge and responsible action above all creation. And may Allah's blessings and peace be upon Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the master of the Arabs and the non-Arabs, and upon his family and his companions, from whom knowledge and wisdom spring. So, it's customary that whenever somebody starts a book, they always start with the praise of Allah and praise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the way of the Sunnah. So he always starts with Alhamdulillah alladhi faddala bani Adam bil ilmi wal amal. So he starts off by, and this is again, it is something that many authors do. In the first few lines or in the first sentence of the book, they praise Allah by linking that praise to the subject matter of the book. So that's why he starts by saying, who favored the children of Adam with knowledge, bil ilmi wal amali, knowledge and action. So that's what this book is about, isn't it? It's about learning, it's about knowledge. So that's why his praise of Allah is linked to his granting the children of Adam knowledge, and Allah is granting the children of Adam the capacity to act on that knowledge. Right? So people might think, well, authors, they just write to start, yeah, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulil Kareem, whatever it may be. But, authors always are careful in how they write things. So it's interesting. That's why he started off by mentioning that in the very first line. And then when he praises the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he praises the Ahlul Bayt and the companions of the Prophet. Again, he links that praise to the subject of the book, which is by saying, from whom knowledge and wisdom spring forth. Right, so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his family and his companions, from whom knowledge and wisdom spring forth. It's an acknowledgement that if we are going, without discussing anything, within that first paragraph is sufficient understanding that if we are going to attain any knowledge or wisdom, it's through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and it's from Allah Azza wa Jal. That's why he starts off with that. It's almost like an acknowledgement that whatever we talk about, whatever the subject matter is, ultimately it always leads back to Allah, right? And so it's an etiquette of writing actually, that we start off by praising Allah, but also talking about the subject matter. He then says, I have observed in our day, you're talking about 7th century Hijri, 6th, 7th century. I have observed in our day many students of learning striving to attain knowledge but failing. Right? So this is they fail. They want to learn, they're striving, but they just fail. They're failing to do so and are thus barred from its utility and fruition, meaning its benefits, because they fail in the acquisition of knowledge. They're obviously not going to benefit from that then. This is because they have missed the proper methods of learning and have abandoned its conditions. Okay, that's the key line here. They've abandoned the method of learning and have missed its proper methods and abandoned its conditions. Anyone who misses his way goes astray and therefore does not reach his objective, however modest or glorious. Okay, so in other words, if you don't learn the preconditions and the method of learning, then you will go astray. And if you go astray, you will not fulfill your objective, and that is the objective of studying the Deen. It is my desire here to elucidate the proven methods of study that I myself had either read about in books or heard from my learned and wise teachers. It is my hope that those sincerely interested in this matter would pray for my deliverance and redemption on the Day of Judgment. Okay, so a very simple, humble beginning. He doesn't talk about it in pages. Just this is what I've observed, and this is why I've observed this, and this is why I'm writing this book. Please make dua for me and my salvation on the Day of Judgment. Very simple. Okay. Okay. Right. So chapter 1 we look at today is about the nature and merit of learning and knowledge. Okay, the nature and merit of knowledge and learning. So Imam Zarnuji starts by the famous hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he says, "The Messenger of Allah said, the quest for knowledge is incumbent upon every Muslim man and Muslim woman." All right, so he starts with a very famous, well-known hadith. It's a matter of fact that studying and learning the Deen is obligatory upon every Muslim, male and female. Okay. So now everything we discuss thereafter is how we fulfill that hadith or act on that hadith. But he makes a very good point after that. He says, but it is not obligatory for every Muslim to seek all aspects of learning, but seek only that which relates to one's standing. Okay, because there's certain things in hadith which are mentioned in the general sense. So the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ here is, you must study knowledge. Is farad to the acquisition of knowledge is farad upon everyone. The questions then do arise from that. Does that mean every type of knowledge? Does that mean all of the time? Does that mean unconditionally? There's, we just have to, wherever there's knowledge, you just have to go. There's no qualification to that. So Imam Zarnuji straight away, he says that that clearly it's not obligatory for every person to acquire every type of knowledge, but only seek that which relates to one's standing. Okay, so one's standing meaning what's according to one's hal, situation, and he'll elaborate what he means by that. It is said that the most meritorious knowledge is that in keeping with one's standing, okay, i.e. one's position. And the most meritorious action is to maintain one's standing. So being in a position whereby a person can maintain their standing, in other words, maybe their job, their occupation, and meaning they can maintain themselves in this world in the dunya sense, and they can maintain themselves through their knowledge in the dunya, in the deen sense as well. It is necessary for the Muslim to strive for as much knowledge as he may need in his standing, whatever this may be. Since one must perform prayers, he must know enough about the prayer that will help him acquit himself of this obligation, right? Knowledge of his other religious obligations is likewise incumbent upon him. Whatever leads to the fulfillment of a duty is itself a duty, and what leads to the establishment of an obligation is itself an obligation. Okay, so he basically makes the point is that what's obligatory to do is obligatory to know about. What Allah orders you to do, you must know enough about that to adequately and sufficiently discharge that obligation. Okay, so that's why we have courses like that teach people the obligatory aspects of the religion and so on. Okay, but I mean, he mentions the deen, but also in the dunya sense. I mean, there's no you can't say that certain knowledges or certain secular studies are obligatory, but meaning from the perspective of Allah Azza wa Jalla and the Day of Judgment, but there are for sure certain aspects of secular learning that are required to live a quote unquote successful life, to allow a person to navigate through life. They must learn things about the dunya, especially living in our countries, to have a home, to run a family, to run finances, to learn about basic things. People must have those understandings, and they must acquire that. I mean, it goes without saying, but from a point of this particular hadith and this point that Imam Zarnuji is mentioning, that learning about these are very necessary as well. It was once said to Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, will you not compose a book on asceticism? So, when you write a book about tasawwuf, he replied, I composed a book on commerce, on business, right? Meaning that the true ascetic is he who is careful to protect himself against dubious and unsanctioned practices in commerce. Okay, so this is, in other words, telling us that we can't always be narrow-minded in our visions of studying or even compiling books. If, let's say, we only have knowledge of fiqh or aqidah or hadith or whatever it may be, then obviously we'll write about that. Sometimes you have to think outside the box, like, okay, what else is the need of the Muslims? That if someone's a professional, and in fact, I was thinking about this earlier, is that if someone's a professional, it'd be very useful for that person to utilize that knowledge of their profession to write something as guidelines for Muslims in that profession. That's useful, isn't it? If someone, whatever it may be, a doctor, even a lawyer, an accountant, or even, anything you can think of, a teacher, but writing something from a teacher's perspective or a lawyer's perspective or an accountant's perspective that will assist the Muslims in that profession, you see, guidelines for them of how to excel in that profession from a Muslim's perspective whilst maintaining the Muslim identity, meeting the challenges of that profession. Okay. The same applies, he says, to all other occupations and professions. Anyone who works in a given field is duty bound to learn how to guard against what is prohibited therein. Okay, so whatever we do, it's of course necessary for us to learn what we're allowed to do in that profession and what we're not allowed to do in that profession. Okay, and that goes for everything that we do in the dunya, of course. This is also obligatory with knowledge of the conditions of the heart, such as complete reliance on Allah, repentance, fear, satisfaction with Allah's decree. For this applies to people of every walk of life. Okay, so he's saying that just as people need to look at, their outer conditions and see what's required for them on the outside, they must also look at the hal, the situation and the standing of the heart. I mean, that's the heart's obviously always present with us, and we always have certain qualities which we have to have. We have to have reliance on Allah Azza wa Jal. We have to rid ourselves of all of the ugly qualities of pride, of arrogance, and so on and so on. So assessing that is also very, very important. He then says, the nobility of learning is not foreign to anyone, since it is something peculiar to all humankind. Okay, so it's something that Allah Azza wa Jal has blessed Bani Adam. Again, that's why he started off. I mean, the acquisition of learning through perseverance and thrive and struggling and striving, that's peculiar to mankind. Animals don't have that. They obviously have knowledge of which is innate that Allah Azza wa Jal blesses them with so that they can survive, the instinct and so on. But the acquisition and the learning of knowledge in the same way is obviously unique to mankind. With the exception of knowledge, people as well as animals to some degree are associated with several virtues such as valor, courage, strength, generosity, and compassion. Learning, however, is the exception. Through it, Allah revealed the preeminence of Adam alayhi salam over the angels whom he commanded to prostrate themselves before. Okay, so he says that, everybody has certain qualities, right, which are common to all of us, right? And they are great qualities, but ilm, knowledge, is unique in that Allah Azza wa Jal made that quality the means or the manifestation of Adam alayhi salam's authority over the angels. He made the angels bow down to Adam alayhi salam because of his knowledge. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. That's what Surah Baqarah mentions, isn't it? Okay. Surah Baqarah mentions. And so within doing so, Allah Ta'ala manifested the superiority of the one who knows over the one who doesn't know. In other words, Adam alayhi salam had all the great qualities. He had all of the attributes and the qualities which were noble. He's a prophet of Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal could have said, linked the prostrating to Adam alayhi salam to his nobility, his being a prophet, his pure heart, his humility, whatever it may be. But Allah Azza wa Jal chose knowledge. Okay. Learning is indeed noble, for it leads to a fear of Allah which entitles the believer to receive Allah's benevolence and eternal bliss. In this vein, Muhammad bin al-Hasan Abu Abdullah, he mentions, learn, for learning is an adornment for one who possesses it, a virtue and a prelude to every praiseworthy action. Okay, so learning is an adornment for the one who acquires it. Okay, and it beautifies every action. Okay, learning about something beautifies that action, right? And everybody can understand what that means. Is that if someone prays without knowledge or without understanding what they're doing, is not the same as the one who prays with understanding of the significance of ruku, how to do the sujood, how to say the tashahhud, what they're saying in tashahhud. You can never compare the two in their potential, right? Because the one who recites with understanding and knowing and does something with that will always be in a position to receive more from Allah Azza wa Jal, right? And that's why when the Sahaba, obviously, when they used to recite the Quran, they knew what the Quran was saying, what was written in the Quran. They knew the outer meaning and the inner meaning. That's why they used to recite and weep, right? But the one who doesn't, of course, there are the beauty of the Quran is that there's an attachment regardless of whether you know or not. But for sure, the one who recites with understanding will have a greater natural connection with the Quran than the one who perhaps does not have that same understanding. So it beautifies actions. Profit each day by increasing your learning and swimming in the seas of beneficial knowledge, right? Swimming in the seas of beneficial knowledge, right? And this alludes to the fact that, it doesn't matter how many books you have, there's so much more you don't know. And it's such a, it's phenomenal the depths of understanding there are, all right, in the Quran and the Sunnah, but also in knowledge in general. People study mathematics for 20 years and they're still learning something new. Isn't that, it's astonishing, right? The parameters of human understanding, right? Science, I mean, the discoveries that people make and, about the world and the natural sciences. I mean, they're still making programs about the world that have never been made before, or they're showing details that have never been seen before, and so on. So how much a person can learn. There's actually no limit to it. It's such a phenomenal thing that those who study will appreciate more, because when someone studies, they think, oh yeah, I've acquired some understanding. But the more they learn, the more they continue to learn, and the more they sit with righteous teachers, the more someone realizes that actually I don't know anything. And that's how it used to be, is that, yeah, you feel, oh yeah, alhamdulillah, we studied this book. But then when you sit with teachers who have studied, 15 books on the same subject, and they're teaching like, things, their understanding is, photographic memory and all of these things. So it's like literally an ocean, right? Increase your learning and swim in the seas of beneficial understanding. Give yourself up to the study of jurisprudence, for the knowledge of jurisprudence is the best guide to piety and the fear of Allah. So this Imam is saying that study fiqh, and people think fiqh is boring. Fiqh meaning Islamic law. People find that quite boring. So, fiqh, yeah, do's and don'ts and haram, halal, and things like that. It's so important for obvious reasons that it it tells you about all types of actions and what we do from the moment we get up in the morning till the moment we sleep. All of those things are actions. What to do, how to do them, all of those things. Fiqh tells us that. But in all honesty, it's not really taught in the right way anymore. That's why people get bored of it. But even, in the books of fiqh and the detailed explanations, they have so much nuance, so much rationale, so much principle and logic behind them that's basically just forgotten now. Um, in the general sense, a lot of people don't study that in sufficient depth to teach that to people. But if people studied it in the way that it's ought to be studied, they'd find it fascinating. It's actually fascinating, like why rules are the way they are. So this is the rule, but why is it the way it is, and how it came to that point? There's a lot of really deep understanding there. And so Ismail says, give yourself up to jurisprudence. But I should also add that, notwithstanding the fact that, let's say for argument's sake, it is boring. So what if it's boring? I mean, this idea that everything has to be entertaining, everything has to capture our imagination, everything has to be on Netflix for me to watch it, or something has to be a particular way, we hear it all the time that, people, lessons are too long now, they're too boring now, or we have to move with the times, or what are the times? The times are anything more than a 10-second video, people don't want to know. Those are the times we're living in. And what are you going to learn in 10 seconds? And in those 10 seconds, you have to do something outlandish. Otherwise, you'd lose the person. That's what social media has done to everyone, is just obliterated every good quality that people have. Right. So, moving with the times is fine, but we have to pull ourselves back from the traps of shaitan, which is the modern day, and actually persevere in studying something which is beneficial for us, whether it's exciting or not. You know, um, it's just a delusion that people have that, the path to Allah is easy. Yeah, be full of flowers. Yeah, well, I'm only going to do things which I find interesting. If I don't find it interesting, I'm not going to read it. And is that the case with our studies? Do we, or in our GCSEs? Did we find all the things interesting in our GCSEs? No, but we did it. What about A levels? What about a degree? Did everybody find their degrees riveting and really exciting? No, they didn't. But they did it. Why? Because they acknowledge the benefits that it has, and they realize that actually I have to do this, because if I don't do this, I'm going to fail my degree. And if I fail my degree, I won't get a job. And if I won't get a job, then all the rest of it. Right. So that thought process applies to the dunya, because we're scared of the consequences of not doing the boring stuff. But when it comes to Allah and His Messenger, oh, it's too boring. Yeah, I can't concentrate. I can't sit in the lesson of fiqh. Why would I do that? Yeah, I just need the bite size. Like the essential. Just that one. I just want to know that much. Right. Allah and His Rasul. I set down this magnificent, uh, you know, law for us to study and understand. But we, mashallah, we find it too boring. That's our condition. So these are things that we have to rectify. We have to do the boring stuff sometimes. It's not boring. That's how I started off by saying, even if it was, we should still do it because it gives us understanding of the deen. So he says, give yourself up to the study of jurisprudence. And it is the straightest path to the ultimate goal. That's what he says. It's the straightest path to the ultimate goal, which is Allah Azza wa Jal. It is the milestone leading to the ways of proper guidance. It is the fortress that saves one from all hardships. Indeed, one godly person versed in jurisprudence is more powerful against shaitan than 1,000 worshippers. Okay, that's the famous hadith. So the one who has understanding of fiqh in the true sense is more powerful over shaitan than 1,000 worshippers. Okay, 1,000 worshippers. So the barakah in that, you can only imagine then, isn't it? I mean, studying something, and there's a lot of barakah in studying something in more detail and in more depth, and it really opens the mind as well. So people sometimes they aren't able to perhaps benefit from the delights of studying or the fruits of a particular science, partially because they don't go into enough detail to get to the core of that subject, and that's when someone truly realizes the benefit of it. So if you're just reading, okay, it is obligatory to do this, it is obligatory to do this, it's sunnah to do this, like a list form, okay, that's fine. You'll find it boring. It's good to learn. But if we start to look at it in further detail and study further, then we say, okay, why is it for us? Okay, what's the basis of that obligation? But in the other school, it's not for us. So why is there a difference? And then you look at the differences and the nuances of the law. Then it all of a sudden becomes very, very interesting. But we have to go through that process of the beginner level, then up to intermediate, then to more advanced. But the potential is within that study for sure. Likewise, knowledge impacts all other human characteristics, such as generosity and avarice, cowardice and courage, arrogance and humility, chastity, and so on. For arrogance, avarice, cowardice are all illicit. Only through knowledge of them and their opposites is protection against them possible. Okay, so in what he's highlighting here is another fairly obvious point, that when you have an understanding of characteristics and you study them in a bit more detail and you study the diseases of the heart in more detail, then you are equipping yourself to remove those diseases. Everybody knows what's right and wrong without studying. I think people obviously have a basic understanding. This is right, this is wrong, straightforward. But those who study the Deen and who actually study those characteristics and the books of the righteous in more detail, they have a more profound understanding of the subtleties of the heart and the subtleties of those diseases and how to get rid of them. Okay, so whichever way you look at it, understanding and Deen and knowledge empowers a person, right? In numerous different ways. Okay. Right, let's move forward a little bit. He says on page 4, it has been said that knowledge of those things that affect a person under all conditions holds a position similar to food. No one can dispense with it. But knowledge of matters affecting a person only in certain occasions, this holds a position equivalent to medicine, which is needed only at stipulated times. But knowledge of astrology holds a position equivalent to a disease. Its study is prohibited because it is harmful and brings no benefit. Okay? It is impossible to flee from the decree of Allah and His dispensation, which astrology deals with. So really good point here. He basically breaks down knowledge into three categories. There's certain types of knowledge which are obligatory and are like food. You can't do without food, and you can't do without that knowledge. And those are things which relate to obligations and so on. Then you have certain types of understanding which are like medicine. You just take them periodically as and when required. Okay. Let's say, or according to situations. So, for example, if you are going to business, then you should study about the laws of business. And if you are going on Hajj, then you need to learn about Hajj. If you're never not in a position to go, then you don't really need to learn. It's not obligatory for you to learn about it because you're not going. But there are certain knowledges and certain sciences which are prohibited in Islam, which are frowned upon. Astrology is one of them. Okay, so there are certain things which are more beneficial than others. Every Muslim is expected to occupy himself at all times with the remembrance of Allah and with his invocation and supplication, with reading the Quran, giving charity, which wards off calamities, asking for forgiveness and safety in this world and the next. This is so Allah may shield one from trials and tribulations. Okay, so he just mentions just a paragraph here about the dhikr of Allah, making dua and constantly supplicating to Allah Azza wa Jal. He highlights that the one who makes dua regularly, even if he is struck down with hardship, Allah Azza wa Jal will give them the tawfiq to overcome that hardship. Right, final thing I think in here. It just mentions study of secular studies, saying studying medicine is obviously allowed, and other sciences which are beneficial, which are permissible to study. He's just comparing that with certain secular studies which are not permissible, like astrology. Jurisprudence is the science of the fine points of knowledge. Abu Hanifa said, jurisprudence is a person's knowledge of his rights and duties. He further said, the purpose of learning is to act by it, while the purpose of action is to abandon the fleeting things of this life, that for that which lasts forever. Okay, so again, towards the end of the chapter, he just talks about it. Final thing for today. So one must never be heedless of his soul, or of what benefits or harms it in this life and in the next. Hence, man must seek out what is useful while avoiding what is harmful to the soul, lest his intelligence and his knowledge become weapons against him in the hereafter, and thus his punishment is increased. May Allah preserve us from his wrath and his punishment. Okay, so that is basically the introduction and chapter 1. So he starts, as you've heard, talking about the merits of learning, and in very brief form, summarizing some important points that we ought to bear in mind about learning and the merits thereof, inshallah Aziz. So Allah Ta'ala gives tawfiq to understand and to understand what we've studied and act on according to that. And next week, I mean, the chapters are very short, by the way. The book itself is 40 pages, and the contents wise, there are 13 chapters in total. So next week, we will cover the purpose of study, the choices in learning, and possibly respecting knowledge and those who possess it. Okay, so the purpose of study, the choices in learning, and respecting knowledge and those who possess it. Inshallah, we'll look at that next week. وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.